Working undercover, you learn to create a pretty good poker face.
Welcome to Mindset Lessons from the Field. I'm Gina Casazza, the author of the upcoming memoir, Training with the SEAL. Today's guest is a former FBI operative, cybersecurity expert, attorney, and the founder of the Georgetown Group and Next to Shore AI. He's best known for bringing down Robert Hanssen, a notorious Russian mole within the FBI. Now he's on the front lines of digital defense, helping companies and individuals outsmart hackers, disarm scammers, and prepare for the rising tide of AI-generated threats. His new book, Spies, Lies, and Cybercrimes, is officially out. It is in the bio, so make sure you check that out if you are loving this episode, because I'm really excited to talk to him and dive into it all. So without further introduction, ladies and gentlemen, Eric O'Neill. Eric, thank you so much for being on the show.
Gina, it's great to be on Mindset. I appreciate you having me.
Of course. I really want to dive in. I have so many questions with everything that you have done within your career and where you're going and all that stuff. But I want to just start with how we ended up at the FBI.
Sure. Well, I applied. I originally, I think the entire focus of my life, because my father was a Naval Academy grad and a Navy officer. He was a submariner. And so was his father and his father, right? So I come from a long line, was to go to the Naval Academy. Mm-hmm. And I didn't. You know, that's a longer story. You can read my first book, Gray Day, and I spent a chapter explaining it. But I ended up not going. I ended up graduating from Auburn University with a degree in psychology and political science, which meant, hey, I had to figure out what to do next. And I applied, not just to the FBI, but to the DEA and the NSA and the CIA and the Secret Service and virtually every one of those alphabet agencies that would allow me to gain critical skills that I knew I wouldn't find anywhere else, but also serve my country. I think I felt a little bad that I didn't go into the military, and that was my way of fixing that, but also finding a way to gain those skills that you just can't find anywhere else. The FBI selected me. It was one day between the FBI and DEA. So that one day of the FBI calling me first completely changed the outcome of my life.
You said something really interesting that I want to touch base on. And you mentioned you felt a little bad that you didn't go military route, right? Your whole family did that. Was there a disappointment within or just within your family that you didn't go that route?
And certainly. The most difficult conversation I think I've ever had with my parents was in coming home. I was supposed to go to Auburn for a year and then transfer into the Naval Academy. You don't transfer, you start over, right? But I was going to study aerospace engineering. You know, I was the full Top Gun Maverick plan, right? And the original Top Gun, right? Because I'm a Gen Xer. I was going to go into Navy. I was going to study aerospace engineering. I was going to go to a flight. I was going to fly F-14 Tomcats, and my whole life was ahead of me. Then eventually get to NASA and go up in space. And went to Auburn for a year of aerospace engineering. Then I would start over at the Naval Academy as a first year. That was my life path. But after a year at Auburn, I decided not to go. I decided aerospace wasn't for me. Not that I can't do math, but it just wasn't my big, great friend. There's a reason I'm an author and a public speaker and not a physicist or a mathematician. And I had that very difficult conversation with them where I said, I've decided to do something different. My parents are amazing. My father looked at me and he said, as long as you're doing what you feel is best for you, but you're doing it to your best potential, then it's okay. I could tell they were absolutely disappointed, but I had 3 younger brothers and they worked very hard and they got 2 into the academy who both served in the Navy and are now doing amazingly well. So that made up for that. But I think I always felt that I did want to serve my country. I did want to do something that mattered and made a difference and improved people's lives. There's many paths to that. For me, it was the FBI.
Yeah, I had to touch base on that because I feel like a lot of listeners on the show can relate to that in terms of having that conversation of I remember for myself when I decided I didn't want to go into my senior year of high school. I decided I didn't want to play varsity and I wanted to go into film. I wanted to just focus on a career. And people were like, who's more crushed, you or your dad? And and I just always think about, that, but in a way I had to do it for me. And sometimes you just, getting over that guilt of, of pleasing of pleasing somebody else. So I definitely wanted to touch base. So I appreciate you mentioning that. And now you said something else though in the first part of that, and you said there are certain skill sets that I'm only going to be able to get in these departments. What are those skill sets that you get in those departments that you're not going to find in a normal civilian job?
Well, part of it, I think the most critical part is the training, right? I'm a graduate of the FBI Academy in Quantico. I'm a graduate of was then a secret school within the Academy, the National Security School, where you were trained to go undercover as what's colloquially known as a ghost, otherwise an investigative specialist. So my training in the FBI was to be a surveillance specialist and undercover operative. I learned counterintelligence and counterterrorism. But beyond that, you learn how to think like a spy. You have to learn the tradecraft of the adversary in order to understand how to beat them. And what was amazing about the tradecraft I learned is I was learning tradecraft from the CIA, from Mossad, from different terrorist groups. We have defectors who would come and be our teachers. I was learning how to deploy photography and different technologies in how I followed and targeted suspects, and many other different techniques, how to follow someone without being seen, disguise training. It changes your way of thinking about the world. And if you want to use that training in a broader sense and how it impacts security and especially your personal security, those lessons that I learned in critical thinking, in understanding what's happening around me and protecting myself, are applicable to so many other disciplines. And they've served me incredibly well. There's also, beyond that, the ability to be tenacious, to continue even when you feel that, there's nothing here. But, to find that little needle in a haystack that leads you to the next clue, to finally breaking a case. And the ability to be resilient. It's exhausting to go undercover and chase down terrorists and spies. It requires an immense amount of focus. And for someone who is a chronic kid who grew up with ADHD, this was very difficult for me to learn and master, but I did. The ability to expand your mind and think in many different directions at once, and then snap right back to the critical decision that you have to make in a moment. These are the skills you learn when you're in high pressure situations where you cannot fail and you have to achieve excellence every single time.
You said so many amazing things. I have so many questions, but I don't want to forget this one. For someone that's listening that has ADHD and struggles with focus, what was a tool or a thing that you did in order to direct your focus?
Yeah, I'll tell you the most important tool: lists. I make lists every single morning. The first thing that I do is I sit down and I make a broad list of all the things I want to achieve. And then from that list, I list out in order the things that I can achieve that day and I'm going to do. The problem with ADHD has nothing to do with, the attention deficit is a bad way of describing it. It's more that you can get distracted or hyper-focused on one task to the detriment of all others. Mm-hmm. And if you set up your tasks in a way where you have the easiest ones to achieve first and knock those out, it gives you that push to go to the next and go to the next. Mm-hmm. And then suddenly you're done. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing. So when you can expand your mind in that, and that crazy ability to hyper-focus into knocking tasks out and moving to a broader end result, it's amazing how powerful it can be. One thing that ADHD gives you, I think of it as not a negative, but actually an incredible positive, is this ability to think in many different directions. And when you can master it, like when I'm on stage, I've memorized my keynote, I'm delivering the keynote, I'm reading the crowd, I'm watching the faces, targeting every single person who pulls out their phone, who might not be focused. I'm changing things on the fly. I'm doing all these different things. And that's sort of the gift of being able to think expansively in many different directions. But I can also snap right back to where I need to be in my keynote, in the idea, the threads that I have in my mind, the direction that I want to go. And it's just like knocking out a list. So I think that starting, if people are struggling with making that list every morning, and then your little list that you're going to knock out first in order, it will start training your mind into being able to maintain that focus.
Another thing that you mentioned, which I want to talk about, was you mentioned going undercover is exhausting. And what I want to know too is like, and I want to equate this to civilian life in terms of like, for myself, I went into the film industry, and you have this goal, like you mentioned earlier, you had this plan for yourself, right? And it was all the way up into NASA, right? And it was laid out, right? And for myself, I had this plan for the film industry, but with the film industry, it's like you would get a PA job on a show, and if that show made it to like a bunch of seasons, it was really quick. You're going to be moving up. You're going to be getting to where you want to go, right? But then all of a sudden, your show, you could be doing two seasons on the show gets canceled, and then you're back where you started, and you kind of got to find a new one and keep going as you're moving up, right? And for yourself, being an undercover and FBI, you have cases that you have to solve and things like that. What was your longest case, and how did you handle the frustrations of, like, I guess, like the day to day in, because you have a goal. It's like to break the case, right? But you don't know
Yes.
if it's going to happen in a month, 6 months, 6 years, right? So, how do you keep going with knowing that end goal, but also understanding the time and not being so frustrated?
Part of the issue with working undercover for the FBI is you move when the bad guys move, and you act when they act, you sleep when they sleep, and you eat when they eat, right? If you are following, surveilling, ghosting a target, then you're moving with them. And that can be excruciatingly boring. And when you see the movies, and I know quite a bit about movies, and, I also have a movie made about me. If anybody wants to go see the movie Breach, starring Ryan
Oh,
Phillippe
yes.
as me and Chris Cooper as Robert Hanssen, I'm sure we'll get into that. That was a movie that I worked on in all aspects. I've written a few movies. I've written a number of TV shows. Some that got bought, none that got made. So I understand that grind, right? But when you're undercover, it's not like the movies. In the movies tend to give it this. I think when we were undercover and we were working, we might have 10 hours we were working a day, right? Before another team would come over and take over. We're sitting around just waiting for that 15 minutes of adrenaline go time. That could be an infiltration, that could be a high-speed chase, that could be all sorts of things. And you become a junkie for that 15 minutes. But a lot of it is just sitting and staring and wishing a door would open, or that the tail light would light up red, as they drove off and you were moving again. So you have to have that ability to like I said, tenacity, right? Because if you can't just focus your mind and continue, then it becomes very, very difficult. My longest case, to go back to your original question, was about 2 years on one target who was suspected of being a spy. In fact, suspected of being the spy. There were many different targets before we actually found Robert Hanssen, who ended up being the most legendary spy in U.S. history, someone we've been after for 2 decades. And this other individual, we had been after him for quite some time. I think many knew that this was a waste of time, that there wasn't anything there, but you still have to work the case. You still have to work the angles. You still have to do your job. Even when you think that your job is going to go anywhere, you still have to come in and be excellent every day. If you want to translate that to broader life, if you go in and you hate your job, you still must do it excellently every single day. You have to achieve. And if you really don't like it, you leave and you go somewhere else. Now, the advice I've always given friends and younger people who ask and mentees is get a new job before you go to the next one, right? Suck it up, do the job, go in, get the best performance reviews you possibly can, and use that to springboard somewhere else. But you don't go in because you don't like a job and slack off. That's the worst thing you can do.
Was it challenging for you to write your movie or write other ones that that got bought, or all that stuff, that where you have to exaggerate and you have to really, it's the movies, right? And I watched this video the other day where someone was like, imagine if the main character just sat at home all day on their phone. Like, how boring would that be? But when you think about it, like, that's what, like, they're playing video games or watching TV, right? And
right.
and I used to watch a couple of YouTube videos of special forces that would, break down movies and stuff like that of them. So is it challenging for you to be like, this isn't what it really is, but we got to make it entertaining? Or do you try and make it as realistic as possible while, how does it work for you?
When I worked with Adam and Bill on Breach, who are the original writers of Breach, they sat me down and said, Adam Mazur and Bill Rocco, they sat me down and said, look, this is a Hollywood movie. So you're going to understand, we're not doing a documentary. we're going to make something that's going to sell, that people are going to come in and take tickets, and we can't have you sitting in a car watching somebody all day, right? Or playing solitaire on your computer waiting for Hanssen to come out of the office. So I had to quickly wrap my mindset around the fact that a Hollywood movie is always going to be a little bit different from real life, even if it's based on reality.
Mm-hmm.
And then when Billy Ray, award-winning director and screenwriter, came in to rewrite the screenplay with me and then direct the movie, he said something, the same thing. But what he did want to do is keep the core of the movie very true. So when you see Hanssen and I in the room, almost all of that is true. I like to say now, right, as we move this further into the future, is if you want to see a movie that's about me, go see Breach. If you want to read my story, go pick up my book, Gray Day, because that's the actual fact. And what I tell people is, if you haven't watched Breach, read Gray Day and then watch Breach, and then you'll know where we changed it. It actually.
I
really
love that kind. Yeah,
Yeah.
I do that a lot with movies and books or true stories and things like that, where I want to read, watch, and and sometimes I'm such a geek because I work in the industry where I will read the script. I'll find it online. And I'll check out, I'll read the book to screenplay to see what they cut, what they kept in, all that stuff. And then I'll watch it. Yeah, that's really, really cool. Now let's get into how you ended up with Robert. Like, how did you end up how was he on you were on his case?
I was brought into the case after a joint task force between the FBI and CIA were able to buy a slim file of information, something like that from a former KGB intelligence officer who had just stolen information when the Soviet Union collapsed and saved it for a rainy day. Decades later, sold it for millions of dollars and witness protection, somewhere warm near a beach. Can't say. Now I have two high schoolers, one who's a senior, and we're applying to schools. And I think his best trick was to put in part of the deal that his kids were going to get the college of their choice, full ride without having to apply. I think that's worth more than the millions. And he's gone, right? And so they open this file of information and they run prints on a trash bag. They listen to a cassette tape, one of Hanssen's biggest mistakes. They read the letters and do some text analysis, and they realize, oh my God, it's Robert Hanssen. Now, hearts fell in that little room of special agents who received the information, because Robert Hanssen wasn't just the top Soviet analyst in the FBI, someone who was supposed to find the spies. He was a spy hunter. He was also one of the individuals that at certain points during the case, they had asked to find the spy. That's a roundabout way of saying they had asked Hanssen to find himself. They brought him in and said, hey, you're the top analyst. Who do you think the spy could be? And he set the FBI on these hundreds of people, wild goose chase. So they were never close to him, and probably laughed as he collected his money and dropped his secrets over all those years. And he spied for 2 decades, 22 years. I was brought in right after that in December. The FBI desperately needed to catch him red-handed. They had enough probably to pull a conviction for conspiracy to commit espionage, but that's tricky. And Hanssen was the sort of stoic person who probably would have taken, the deal and served 25 years in prison and never said a word. The critical thing for the FBI was to find out what he'd done and fix it, because he had completely blown holes in counterintelligence. And when the FBI can't perform counterintelligence, when your adversary knows what you're going to do before they do it, counterintelligence being the science of defeating the espionage goals of foreign countries, right? Which could be Russia, it could be China, it could be, and here he was giving the information to Russia, but it could also be various terrorist groups that were learning from Russia back in the day. If you can't learn what he did, you can't fix it. So that was the goal, to get him red-handed, committing espionage, put the death penalty over his head, and then say either work with us or we're going to execute you. And that's what we were able to achieve. But it was a long, drawn out and very difficult undercover operation. Now, why'd they pick me to go undercover in the most
You read my mind.
the unique case that the FBI had ever run. They literally gave him his dream job in a new section that they built just for him. Hanssen was a hacker. One of the things that made him so successful as a spy was he was exploiting computer systems at the FBI and other agencies that were never built to defend from someone that was on the inside. In the FBI, we call a mole, and what we call today a trusted insider. He was the prototypical trusted insider, stealing information from computer systems and literally saving them on floppy disks way back in the day, and then dropping them under a footbridge where a Russian intelligence officer would go pick it up. Technology is very different today. In my book, Spies, Lies, and Cybercrime, I talk about that evolution. But if you go back to Hanssen, he was really our first big cyber spy. They gave him his dream job. They put him in charge of building cybersecurity for the FBI. Essentially, they said, hey, you know so much about computer systems. You're the guy who can come in and fix it. We're going to give you access to everything. And that really pulled on his hubris, his pride, his sense of narcissism, and also thinking, wow, I'm going to have access to more computer systems than I've ever had. I can go crazy as a spy. And then the FBI looked around for the one person who could go undercover, a trained FBI agent who knew how to do what's called an elicitation, kind of like you and I, Gina, having a conversation. And my goal is to just have a conversation with you and you feel really comfortable. And hey, Eric's a great guy. We had this great talk, but I've learned so many things from you and you don't realize I've learned it because I'm cueing you, because I'm seeking information, because I'm digging here, but then I'm using other conversations to detract from that. And you have no idea that I've just learned a massive amount when you just think I had a great conversation. So they're looking for the FBI agents who are trained to do that and go undercover, but also turn on a computer and be able to sell the job of building cybersecurity for the FBI. And they couldn't find a single one. So they went deeper into the then very little known group of FBI operatives called ghosts. I had written a program that did target analysis. I won't go too deep into it, but what it did is essentially track targets by saying, if this Russian has been near this sign, and we've seen him for the past 3 years at around the same date, if next year we look at the same date, he might be there and we know that he's operating. And it worked. Target analysis over time, predicting a model into the future. That gave me notoriety in the FBI because when you buck the system and do something different, right, it's not always the greatest thing. But it was enough to say, well, this Eric O'Neill guy, kind of a maverick, knows how to turn a computer on. He's been running Spies for years. Let's just throw him in there, even though he's not trained to do this face-to-face job, and hope he comes out all right because we have no other option. And that's how I got on the case. So I was thrown in without any specific training to do this. And if you want to go back to your theme of mindset, it takes a very rigid mindset and a constant telling yourself that you need to be confident, that you need to be assured, even when everything is completely stacked against you. And it was. Hanssen was better at this than me. And going into this, he had to suspect that this was a undercover investigation to catch him. He had to suspect that. He was the master spy. But his only point to decide whether he was in trouble was me. So he just mercilessly attacked that point. My number one job really wasn't catch the spy. It was don't screw up. Because if I did, it would be game over. He would know that I was there to try to catch him. I was there to hunt him. He probably would have run, maybe gotten away, and we would have never learned what he did. He would have never served justice. And who knows, right now he might be roommates in Moscow with Edward Snowden, eating caviar and drinking vodka and hanging out with Putin.
How do you manage your mental state day to day with that? Because you don't know what you're doing. You're like kind of thrown into this, right? And it's like, okay, can't screw up. You have to be confident if you don't feel confident, and you're going up against someone who's an expert, right? And really get all this. So how do you manage that mental state? How do you stay calm? Like, how do you keep your cool, to handle this role as flawlessly as possible?
Well, working undercover, you learn to create a pretty good poker face. When you're tracking a target and you lose them and you come around a corner and they're standing right there, you can't do your favorite expletive moment, right? You have to just calmly walk right by. Your facial expression doesn't change. You don't even show any recognition, right? You just move because they might be watching. I learned, a master class in controlling my facial expressions, emotions, kind of playing poker in real life, where the stakes are, if you fail, you don't lose chips, you take a bullet to the head, right? Or you blow a multi-million-dollar operation. So I was good at that, but I had to learn not just to control myself and not screw up. I also had to learn to win. And the only person I could learn it from was him. And I realized that Hanssen really wanted to be in a position of mentor-mentee. Everyone in the FBI really didn't like him that much. And because of that, he was not good at leading, and he was not good at leading a team. And so he was very often shuffled into these analysis roles where he was very adept at that, but he was never leading a team. And it was clear that he wanted someone who he could mold, who he could shape, who he could see in his image. And the FBI was incredibly clever in picking me as well. I was in law school at the time, going to George Washington University in DC every night. And his oldest son was in law school. We both came from Navy families. His father had served. His mother was a nurse, so was mine. His mother's name was Vivian, so was mine. We were both Catholic, which was critical. He would have never respected anyone who wasn't Catholic, which is a little bit ironic considering he was the most devastating spy in our history, and ruthless. And so there were all these commonalities we talked about. And I could take apart a computer, I could write code, we could do all those things. And we talked about that ad nauseum. There were all these things we had in common, right? And if you kind of think of him as my nemesis, it's strange that we were very alike in many ways. If you strip out, the narcissism and the evil and the espionage that he was doing, we were sort of flip sides of the same coin. And that meant that we had things we could talk about, but it also made him feel comfortable. And this is someone I can shape and mold and mentor. And I realized, okay, let him do that because I can learn from him. And slowly I started learning what he was doing in his questioning me and started turning it back on him. It turned out I'm just clever at this. Some people find hidden skills because you're thrown into a crucible and as it's heated and the pressure is applied and it's heated, the pressure applied, either you explode or collapse or you get hardened and you succeed. And it's those moments you really learn those skills that you wouldn't learn anywhere else. Maybe they can't even be taught. It's just something that's in you. And I learned it. And I learned that I was clever at it. And I beat him at it at the end of the day.
Being that you had so much in common and you guys talked a lot and you learned from him and all that stuff, aside from who he was, do you think you would have gotten along had he just been a normal coworker?
No, I don't. Because he was also, if you've watched that movie, you like movies that, Gina, that movie, Horrible Bosses?
Yeah.
He was worse than all of them, right?
Okay.
He was difficult and it was draining. I would show up at the office. I would stop. I would compose myself. I would take a deep breath. I'd put on that smile and I'd go in there, right? Filled with hate. I just didn't want to work this job. I didn't want to work with him. He would do constant things to undermine me, to make me feel small. It was his personality. He could have his good moments. Even the worst person has their good moments, but he was a very difficult person, especially for people that he saw beneath them in the pecking order, in the chain of command. That was one of his biggest problems. And it's hard to deal with a narcissist. Always have to be right. They always have to prove themselves. They don't like it when you show them up. And that's what I do every day. So this was the job. I mean, I loved my job in the FBI, but this was the moment, the moment of my entire career where I got up every day and the first thing I had to do is get myself out of bed because I knew that it was going to be a terrible day. Not just because I was going into FBI headquarters and working against my great adversary, the most successful spy in U.S. history, the most damaging in FBI's history. I would have to do that and then go to law school and sit through 2 or 3 hours of classes and then get home and keep my wife happy somehow, right? Because I was newly married. I had only been married 3 months by the time I got asked to do this case. Wow. And I couldn't tell her I was working undercover on a case. And she didn't even know what I did in the FBI.
When did she find out?
After he was arrested.
Well, so 2 years.
No, this case, fortunately, we caught him within 3 months.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. So this, would you say do you have a moment like that really tested your mental fitness?
Oh, certainly. There were many moments. There were, he was a yeller. And he could, in my book, In Gray Day, I talk about kind of the scale of epithets. He would call me like an idiot, and then it would move to moron. And then if he called you an imbecile, you knew you were really on his bad side, right? That was very difficult. There was a moment in a parking lot where I was supposed to get him away from his car for a certain period of time. And so that the FBI could search it. and I'd reserved this big SUV. And when we went down there, it wasn't there. Just operational mistake. The ops guy, who's a very good friend, he says, I just didn't find it. I said, you didn't have it there. We've argued over that for years. And I love him, Rich Garcia. Who knows who's right or wrong? It's probably me because I can't see Rich ever making a mistake. But I couldn't find the car. Let's just say that. Or it wasn't there. I don't know. You can go for me or Rich in that case. But either way, I thought it was going to be in this space. It wasn't in that space. And he says, we'll just take my car, which is literally the worst thing that could happen because this whole FBI team is ready to search his car. So I had to get him away from headquarters. We had this plan to go to the Defense Intelligence Agency, and we're going to go tour their information assurance section and learn about them. And his car's not there, and he says, we'll take my car. Well, I had another task that I was supposed to do, which was make him angry to see how he reacts. Now, Hanssen had a legendary temper in the FBI, to the point where there's an administrative assistant who had sued the FBI because she stood up to Hanssen and he grabbed her and threw her to the ground so violently she tore her elbow. And then, of course, the FBI, being the FBI back in the old days, denied it. And, so that's a whole nother story. But, I was thinking of that. I was thinking of that story as I was thinking, well, I've completely blown this operation. I've always thought in my mind, and it's one of the advice that I always give, you have to find some little bit of success in every failure. Otherwise, it's just a failure. And if you can find some success, it's not really a failure. So you just find it, even if it's just a little nugget, right, in an entire river. And so here, I'd failed. We weren't going to be able to search that car because he was insisting we take his. But I could still make him angry. And I did. I made him really angry. I told him, there's no way that we're showing up at the DIA in your ugly, 1980s beat up silver Ford Taurus. How freaking embarrassing. And in seconds, he was on me and grabbed me by my lapels and lifted me up off my feet. Like in a good pair of shoes, I'm 5'11". Hanssen was like 6'3", 4". Really tall. And he's spitting mad, yelling in my face. And I realized, okay, made him angry. Now we know that he's irrational, that he, if you challenge him, if you embarrass him, he doesn't act like normal people, right? Because you don't put hands on somebody in a normal in an office environment, right? You don't do it in the FBI either. You get reported for that. And my first thought was, I've been a martial artist since I was 5. I know a lot of different judo throws, and I was going to do one that planted his head in the ground. But you can't do that because then the case is over. I've killed the guy. I just kind of put my hands up in a very defensive motion. With a wild animal, it's always a good thing to do, and placated him and said, no, it's not about your car. You misunderstand me. It's about you and showing up in a big black SUV with me driving because you're so important, because we have to show how critical you are as an executive in the FBI to these guys at the DIA. And he bought it and he went with it. He said, okay, Eric, but we'll take my car. So, failed that day and that task, but analysts who were doing the psych profile had a wealth of information to use. And that became part of the arrest plan for how they were going to do it, because they were afraid that when they made the arrest, maybe he comes out shooting. He has nothing to lose.
Yeah. Wow. That is that's an interesting one. I want to, as we're at the halfway point of the show, I want to segue because your new book came out, Spies, Lies, and Cybercrime. And, you've said that cybercrime, I believe, third largest economy in the world or something, cybercrime.
Yeah. So if you look at the dark web, right? So I take a very early chapter and I analyze this. One of the biggest pushes to this massive growth in cybercrime, and it's everywhere. If you look at your phone and you look at your text, you're going to see an attack. If you go through your email, you're going to see dozens. Now, cyber criminals are using call centers in the dark web where they're calling and they're pretending to be the IRS or they're pretending to be your bank and they're fooling you that way. They're using traditional espionage methods of deception, old school espionage techniques in order to fool us, to trick us, to use confidence schemes and impersonation schemes. They're using AI. They're using all these ways to steal from us and steal from us in a way where we're just handing the information over. And all of that grows the dark web. So I spend a good amount of time in my book explaining exactly what the dark web is in ways that you could read, anyone could read, and completely understand, and then go to a cocktail party and sound incredibly cool because you can, in 5 minutes, explain what the dark web is. But it's a system of network computers that exist all over the world. Some legitimate computers have part of them partitioned, part of their space is being used for the dark web. And there's even pirate islands that have these computers. It's very difficult for law enforcement to understand where the computers are and who's using them. There's great anonymous sourcing in the dark web. Right now, just cybercrime, because the dark web is the clearinghouse, the evil marketplace for everything. Think of it like the most evil eBay on earth. There's marketplaces for guns. There's marketplaces for drugs. It's the biggest drug trade on earth. It's the biggest trade for human trafficking. You can literally buy a person on the dark web and they will deliver that person to the hotel of your choice. Mercenaries, for assassins, for all sorts of terrible things. But just cybercrime flowing through the dark web in cryptocurrency is currently over $12 trillion a year. 12 trillion going into the pockets of cyber criminals. By 2026, at its current rate of growth, it will be over $20 trillion. So right now, it's the third largest economy on earth by GDP. It still goes to the US, and then China, then the dark web. It's already bigger, who would be 3 and 4, Japan and Germany put together. And by 2026, if things keep going the way it's going, it may actually eclipse China as the second largest economy on earth. And it's next to impossible to shut down. We'd have to turn the internet off to shut it down. So that's what we're up against.
Wow. Oh my gosh. What do you think? Why do you think people aren't taking it seriously? And what do you think the biggest mistake is for individuals or businesses when it comes to cybersecurity?
Well, there are a few things. People take it seriously once they're the victim of a breach, but people think of the dark web as this esoteric thing that exists that they can't put their hands on or really understand. Mm-hmm. So part of what I do very early on in the book is demystify it. Okay. You're going to understand it. You're going to understand how it works and how it is used to target you. Because that knowledge is power. What I'm doing, is putting, I'll use your phrase again because it's such a great one. I'm putting my readers in the mindset of an FBI counterintelligence operative. I'm teaching you all the basic tools that I learned at the FBI Academy and in a career going undercover, working against spies and terrorists, so that you have this mindset to stop these old traditional intelligence attacks, which are now being deployed by the best cyber criminals. So they're going to fool you into thinking that you should trust that email or that text. I just got a text yesterday that looked like it came from my bank. And it said, and the text was, here's your QR, here is your multi-factor code to log in. So you get a multi-factor code after you put in your username and password. Then you sometimes get a text to your phone, or you use your applicator app. It's called multi-factor authentication. It's clever because I don't use a text to get in my bank. I use an app on my phone that's much more secure. But if I click the link, it would take me, because I have tools where I can sandbox and see how this works and not get tricked. I went through the link and it sent me to a website that looked exactly like my bank. And you might think, oh, well, the text came from my bank. Oh no, someone's trying to get in. I better reset my password. You go through, you get in and you reset your password, but you've just handed it to the bad guys. And somewhere on the dark web, some guy is sitting there, or gal, right? Some cyber attacker, just waiting for this to happen. And now they're in your bank account and they take all of it. All of it. They clean you out. It's that simple. But it's using something you might trust, like, oh, my phone. And I got a text and it looks like it came from the right thing. And it gets worse and worse from there, especially with, I go into 2 chapters just in how AI is changing us.
Oh, yeah.
And then how attackers are using it to use these old, confidence schemes, impersonation schemes, deception in order to completely fool us. And not just us, our children are huge targets for impersonation and then exploitation. And some teens have committed suicide over it.
This podcast episode is brought to you by Thrivers Coffee. Podcast guest Nick McKinley's company, Deliver Fund, brings you guys Thrivers Coffee. It is ethically sourced, it's organic, and it supports traffic survivors. That is right. Thrivers Coffee is all about empowering us to making a difference in the fight to end human trafficking. That's why 100% of the proceeds go directly towards their goal of bringing freedom to victims of human trafficking. So if you guys love coffee that is organic, ethically sourced, and tastes absolutely delicious, and want to help to end the fight of human trafficking, check out Nick McKinley's company, Thrivers coffee.
So how do we protect our children? Like, how do we help them from not, or at least understand what's happening so they can also be aware?
One thing, and not to plug it too much, but I'm telling all parents, like, have your kid read the book, or at least read the two chapters on exploitation with them. Because the way to defeat this is to understand how the attacks happen. Okay. So the book is in two parts. The first part is think like a spy. Here's all the ways that cyber criminals are using traditional espionage to fool us. And the second part is act like a spy hunter. And here's how I, as a spy hunter, would defeat them with all that knowledge that you just learned in the beginning. And if we'll go back to movies because you like them so much. I love movies too, Gina. The Karate Kid. Right?
Oh, yeah. I worked for Ralph Macchio. So.
The original one, right? So Daniel-san, he's got to paint the fence and he's got to, sand the floor and wax the car, right? And in doing all that in doing that, he learns how to do an up block, how to do a chop block, right? How to do a wave block. And I'm a martial artist, so, I thought that was all cool. The book's the same way. You read all these really cool stories. And there's a thread story of me being in the center of a cyber attack, but all these stories about deception and impersonation and exploitation and destruction and all of these espionage techniques. And then by the time you get to act like a spy, you know how to do that block. You know how to do the wave block. You know how to, because you've painted the fence, because you've sanded the floor, you understand intrinsically how the spies are operating. You recognize the attack, and then I give you the tools to defeat it. So in that example of your teenager, these attackers mostly play on, say, a teenage boy, and they will find their social media. And they do what's called reconnaissance. They learn about them. They learn who they are. They pull down pictures of their friends. They find out if they have a girlfriend. They find pictures of their parents. We're all online so much right now. Everybody can find out so many things about you. I mean, I run a competitive intelligence company. We always start with social media when we're doing a background on someone. And then after they've gathered all this information, they use a impersonation account, usually a very pretty girl around the same age, that they say, hey, I know this person and this person that you know, we're friends. So-and-so said I should reach out to you in your DMs. Let's chat. And they will chat for hours and flirt and flirt and flirt until finally they send a naked picture. And then they ask the kid to send a naked picture back because fair's fair. And he does. Now they're not talking to the cute girl anymore. They're talking to, in one example that I use, two brothers in Nigeria who scammed over, somewhere like 1,000 kids this way. The next text starts coming back where they're saying, here's a picture of you naked and with a collage of all your family and friends and your girlfriend. And we know all their information. And if you don't pay us, we're going to send this to everyone. And sometimes they can't pay. And in this one case I used in the book, the attackers were actually saying, go kill yourself then. And the young man went into his father's room and got the gun, and his father found him the next morning dead because he was so embarrassed and terrified. So the solution for your kids is recognize it. If you don't know the person, I tell my kids, if you've never touched them before in real life, you have no business texting them online, because you don't know who they are. And if this situation ever happens, if you make the mistake, your next step is to come in and tell me right away. No judgment, just love, and we're going to fix it. And I've got a particular set of skills.
Yeah.
We will fix it. And, parents can hire a person like me to fix it, right? But you have to tell them that hope is never lost. Mm-hmm. It can be fixed. It's not over. And that's an extreme example of a cybercrime. There are examples where businesses are attacked because just the same, like your teenage kid, a person in finance sees a Zoom conference invitation and jumps in, right? And there's the CFO, and the CFO says, hey, I'm going to introduce two partners for this next big endeavor. We're going to do this big project. And he sees them and he says, okay, I'm going to send you some emails directing you to transfer funds so we can get this project moving. So the finance person has seen the CFO. He's talked to them online. He's met the two people that are the project partners. And then in this case, which happened to a huge architecture firm, after the Zoom conference, he gets the emails, and he's over the next 2 weeks, he sends 15 different wires for $25 million to 5 different bank accounts before he finally calls over to the CFO's office and says, do you want me to keep sending these wires? They never heard of him or the wires. $25 million left the company. The entire thing was an AI deepfake. They deepfaked the CFO. They created fake avatars for the partners. And the only real human in the entire call was the target. And this is happening over and over to companies everywhere. So it's not just be careful about a spear phishing email anymore. We can't trust anything we see online anymore. So we have to find a way to think like a spy and act like a spy hunter and verify what we see online. So that's what my book is doing. It's giving
that is a needed book. Wow. Like 100%. I'm so glad it came out yesterday because it's like, gotta get it. And so, okay, do you talk about, because I want people to read the book. I don't want to give too much away, but do you talk about because all I'm thinking is what can we do to protect ourselves? Or is it just be aware? Like I did get like an email. It was a PayPal thing. And I was like, wow, I knew it was a scam, but it was good. Like it was really, really good. And I looked at it and I was doing my research on like really, and then I spotted something that didn't look correct. And I was like, oh, it's a scam, but whoa, was it like really good? But how do we protect ourselves from this stuff? And also I want to know, like, what is your take on parents that are posting photos of everything, like their children and especially their kids? They don't have a say. It's their, my child, fifth grader, going to school. Like, what is your take on that?
Well, let's go in line. Yes, the book does go in the second half of the book, and then a number of appendices which give top 10 ways to recognize and avoid a ransomware attack, top 10 ways to avoid being part of an impersonation scheme, what to do if you feel like you're being exploited, where to call, how to deal with it, who to reach out to. It gives all these steps, concrete steps that you can take if you ever find yourself in that situation. Now, the hope is that you'll never find yourself in that situation because you've read the book and now you know how to recognize the attacks, but the attacks are really clever. I start right up front with a really clever cyber attack that almost got me. I'll let people read the book to learn it, but yeah, it almost got me. And it was just that clever. So no matter how smart you are and whether you're a spy hunter or not, like some of them might get you, how you handle it once you realize it's an attack can be the difference between losing lots of money or all your data and winning. And so that story is great because then how I handled it was how you come out okay. So, that answers the question. The book does that. It goes through all these concrete things you can do to do that. Now you're going to have to remind me your second question.
What do you, what is your take on parents that are putting their children?
Yes, right. So, I don't blame them. If you remember in my generation, at least, when Facebook came out, a lot of parents, as soon as their kids were born, decided that we're going to use Facebook as our free repository of all the pictures of our kids growing up, right? And they could have never known what would happen with things like facial recognition. You're just feeding the algorithm. Now they know exactly who your kid is and they sell that information. I mean, all the different social media platforms do it. There's a reason they're all free. But that information is also a lot of data for attackers to use to know everything about you. I mean, if you've had pictures posted of you through your entire life, that's a huge amount of analysis that they can conduct to learn everything about you. It's one of the reasons that now algorithms are so good at guessing passwords because they know everything about you. Why passwords are completely useless. If I could give a number one cybersecurity tip for the podcast, don't rely on your password. It can be cracked. It can be guessed. It's probably for sale on the dark web. There are 19 billion of them for sale right now. So always rely on something other than a password, like that two-factor authentication text to your phone or the app on your phone. But yeah, I don't post about my kids online. Every once in a while, you might see a picture of me and my daughter, and we're really proud, but she's 17. I don't really have a big Facebook profile. Actually, I'm all over the internet. I'm a public figure. If you look at me online, and I hope you come follow me on Instagram and Facebook, I post a lot of fun stuff on Instagram. It's all me. It's all on brand. We're going to talk about spies, lies, and cybercrime. Come join my newsletter. You can, that's another tip. That's another way that you can learn. Every week, I drop this newsletter where you can learn all sorts of tips. I do cybersecurity breach of the week, cybersecurity tip of the week, and then a starting story about a breach and and something you really need to know about. But I'm very careful with what I put online about myself and certainly about my children. And I've taught them to be very careful. You might be able to find my daughter's Instagram account, but it's private. It's only for her friends, and she doesn't post a lot. And that's smart, because one thing you could tell your children is, if you're an athlete, for example, and you're looking to get into really good college, that coach that's trying to recruit you will ask to see your social media accounts. And they're going to look for judgment, and whether it shows that you have good judgment and you're going to be a good person on the team, or bad judgment and you're going to miss practice because you're out too late. You don't want to create this record when you're really young that impacts your future. You can call it mortgaging your future, right?
Right.
That's a discussion parents have to have with their kids. In the book, I talk about, hey, we resisted for all our kids, no phone until you're 14, which is about as long as we could hold out before the pressure just became a mountain crashing down on us. And none of them were even allowed to have any social media until 13. And that teaches them to read. It makes them more creative. Right. Social media, and especially AI, is impairing cognitive abilities. There was just a study that came out from MIT that using AI too much actually makes you dumber.
Yeah.
Actually makes you dumber. That's a very that's a way of taking a lot of very good science speak and dumbing it down to the simple facts, but that's what they're saying. It impairs your cognitive ability. You don't think or make connections, and your brain doesn't grow and learn when you use too much AI. So having your kids avoid that as long as you can is also very important.
Wow, this was really great. I got to ask you our final question for the show is,
sure.
What can we do as listeners to develop our mental fitness to handle challenges that come our way? And for you, I want to know, what about when we talk about cyber attack, we talk about, if someone was to get that photo that we sent when we were 17, or things like that, what could we do to develop our mental fitness to handle challenges that surprise us?
Well, to prevent cyber attacks, one of the most important things, and I call it becoming an email archaeologist, having that mental rigor to actually look at the email, because so many attacks happen because you glance at email as you're going through hundreds of them and you just trust it, and it puts you in a pressure situation, like your bank account's been compromised, or we tried to send this UPS package to your house, but it got rejected. Click here to, or thank you for purchasing this, exercise machine for $700. If this was not you, click here, right? Take a moment. Okay, I didn't purchase this. It's probably a scam. Always think of it as, this is a scam, and now can I find a way to make it true? Always go from the default, I'm being scammed. And the worst thing that could happen if you think that way is you delete the email and it was actually important. They'll reach out to you again. If it's that important, they'll reach out to you again. But don't fall for the scams. I never click through anything in an email anymore, because I go on podcasts like this one, and I'm an author, and I'm a public speaker, and I'm all over the national stage talking about cybersecurity. So all the bad guys want to get me, right? To put that feather in their hat. So no more. I don't click on anything in any of that stuff. With your kids, look, the most important thing you can do is teach them the same skills. If that picture is out there, it's out there. Nothing can ever be removed from the internet. I get asked all the time, hey, how can we remove something from the internet? You can't. If it's exploitation and abuse, right? Sexual exploitation and abuse material, SEAM, then you can get all of the major web crawlers to remove the search engines. But if it's sitting in a dark web kitty pictures for sale site in Belarus, it's going to always be there. The only actual way to make anything disappear, if you've done something embarrassing, right, and you don't want it on the internet and someone can search for it, is to write a ton of stories and information that uses the same SEAO and buries it down to the 10th page in Google. That's it. And it's really expensive. It takes a lot of time. So kind of the trick there is, don't do the embarrassing thing in the first place. But if you do and it's there, move on. It's not going to completely destroy your life. The best thing, of course, is especially with kids, talk to them about this. Make them understand that this will have repercussions in the future. Snapchat doesn't actually disappear, unless you have very specific settings. And then even then, everybody screenshots everything. So don't believe that, just because you used a platform that says it disappears, it disappears. It doesn't. Always operate from the perspective that everything you send across the internet is there forever and cannot be taken down. And then be smart about what you send.
Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being on the show. You're really great. Definitely going to check out your book. We have it linked in the comment section or the about section. We're also gonna have in there all your stuff, so they could just follow you, Instagram, Facebook, all that stuff, because the newsletter sounds fantastic. Definitely we'll be signing up for that for sure. Because that sounds great. Who doesn't want tips all the time?
And I'll be doing giveaways on the newsletter for people who subscribe, and we'll be doing questions, and even the book has a code to crack that sends you to a special website. And look, I've been undercover for a long time, and I've dealt with cryptography, and I just love codes and secrets, and there'll be a lot of fun stuff like that coming.
I love that. Thank you, Eric, for being on the show. You were a real pleasure. And for everyone that's listening, please like, share, comment, subscribe, become a Substack member for extra goodies. And I will see you guys all next Wednesday. Thank you.